Good evening from Wofford College in Spartanburg, South Carolina. I'm Scott Pelley with CBS News, along with my colleague Major Garrett of National Journal. In just under a year now, Americans will go to the polls to choose a president. Tonight, CBS News and National Journal are pleased to bring you a discussion of the issues by the Republican candidates for their party's nomination. The focus will be foreign policy and national security, the president's role as commander-in-chief. Consider this. The 9/11 attacks came in the 8th month of a new presidency, the Bay of Pigs in the 13th week, and the Civil War on the 40th day of a new presidency. Reminders from history that a president must be prepared to deal with a crisis from day one. The ground rules for tonight's debate are simple. A candidate who is asked a question will have 1 minute to respond, and then at the discretion of the moderators, there can be a 30-second follow-up or a 30-second rebuttal from another candidate. The debate will run a total of 90 minutes. The first hour will be broadcast right here on the CBS television network. The entire 90 minutes will be streamed on cbsnews.com and nationaljournal.com. And we invite you to submit questions during the debate to either website. Joining me now in asking the questions, Major Garrett.
Scott, thank you very much. One more piece of housekeeping. Let's introduce the candidates. Former Utah Governor Jon Huntsman. Representing the 6th District of Minnesota, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann. Representing the 14th District of Texas, Congressman Ron Paul. From Atlanta, Georgia, businessman Herman Cain. Former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. Current Texas Governor Rick Perry. And former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum. Mr. Cain, I'd like to begin this evening with you, sir.
Yes.
This week, a UN nuclear watchdog agency provided additional credible evidence that Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon. If you were president right now, what would you do specifically that this administration is not doing to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon?
The first thing that I would do is to assist the opposition movement in Iran that's trying to overthrow the regime. Our enemies are not the people of Iran, it's the regime. And a regime change is what they are trying to achieve. Secondly, we need to put economic pressure on Iran by way of our own energy independence strategy. By having our own energy independence strategy, we will impact the price of oil on the world market, because Iran uses oil not only as a means of currency, but they use it as a weapon. One of the reasons that they are able to afford that nuclear weapons program is because of oil. Secondly, we would then work to increase sanctions on Iran along with our friends and our allies. So whereas we will not be, where I do believe that they have a nuclear weapons program and they are closer to having a nuclear weapon, stopping them, the only way we can stop them is through economic means.
A quick follow-up, Mr. Cain.
Yes.
When you say assisting the opposition, would you entertain military assistance to that opposition?
No, not at this time. I would not entertain military opposition. I'm talking about to help the opposition movement within the country. And then there's one other thing that we could do. We could deploy our ballistic missile defense capable Aegis warships strategically in that part of the world. We have the biggest fleet of those warships in the world, and we could use them strategically in the event that they were able to fire a ballistic missile.
Governor Romney, would it be worth going to war to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon?
Well, let's start back from there, and let's talk about where we are. This is, of course, President Obama's greatest failing from a foreign policy standpoint, which is he recognized the gravest threat that America and the world faced was a nuclear Iran, and he did not do what was necessary to get Iran to be dissuaded from their nuclear folly. What he should have done is speak out when dissidents took to the streets and say America is with you, and work on a covert basis to encourage the dissidents. Number two, he should have put in place crippling sanctions against Iran. But instead of getting Russia, for instance, to when he gave in our missile defense system to agree to stand with those crippling sanctions, he gave Russia what they wanted, their #1 foreign policy objective, and got nothing in return.
That's the time, Governor, on the question. We're going to adhere to time very quickly. But let me.
I get 60 seconds.
Yes, sir. And
that was 30.
The 60.
Sorry, it started at yellow, so I have much more time to go.
You know what, Governor? I
Yeah.
stand corrected. Yeah. You are right. Please continue.
All right, thank you. Finally, the president should have built credible threat of military action and made it very clear that the United States of America is willing, in the final analysis, if necessary, to take military action to keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Look, one thing you can know, and that is if we re-elect Barack Obama, Iran will have a nuclear weapon. And if we elect Mitt Romney, if you elect me as the next president, they will not have a nuclear weapon.
But, sir, you just described where we are today, and that's what you're going to have to deal with if you become president. How do you prevent them from obtaining a nuclear weapon? Is it worth going to war to prevent that?
Well, it's worth putting in place crippling sanctions. It's worth working with the insurgents in the country to encourage regime change in the country. And if all else fails, if after all of the work we've done, there's nothing else we can do besides take military action, then of course you take military action. It is unacceptable for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. We will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. This term unacceptable has been applied by several presidents over history, and our current president has made it very clear that he's not willing to do those things necessary to get Iran to be dissuaded from the nuclear folly. I will take a different course. I will make sure that the sanctions, diplomatic pressure, economic pressure, and support of insurgents within the country help them become dissuaded to get away from their nuclear ambition.
And finally, this time it is time.
Yeah, and finally, have that military threat out there.
On the follow-ups. Yeah. We're going to try to adhere to the time.
Mr. Speaker, is this the right way to look at this question, war or not war? Or do you see other options diplomatically or other non-war means that the United States has at its possession with dealing with Iran that it has not employed?
Well, let me start and say that both the answers you just got are superior to the current administration. You know, there are a number of ways to be smart about Iran and relatively few ways to be dumb, and the administration skipped all the ways to be smart.
Could you tell us the smart ways,
sure.
Mr. Speaker?
First of all, maximum covert operations to block and disrupt the Iranian program, including taking out their scientists, including breaking up their systems, all of it covertly, all of it deniable. Second, maximum coordination with the Israelis in a way which allows them to maximize their impact in Iran. Third, absolute strategic program comparable to what President Reagan, Pope John Paul II, and Margaret Thatcher did to the Soviet Union, of every possible aspect short of war, of breaking the regime and bringing it down. And I agree entirely with Governor Romney. If in the end, despite all of those things, the dictatorship persists, you have to take whatever steps are necessary to break its capacity to have a nuclear weapon.
Congressman Paul, let me follow up with you for just 30 seconds. Is it worth going to war to prevent a nuclear weapon in Iran?
No, it isn't worthwhile. And the only way you would do that is you would have to go to the Congress. We as Commander-in-Chief aren't making the decision to go to war. You know, the old-fashioned way, the Constitution, you go to the Congress and find out if our national security is threatened. And I'm afraid what's going on right now, it's similar to the war propaganda that went on against Iraq. And, you know, they didn't have weapons of mass destruction, and it was orchestrated, and it was, to me, a tragedy of what's happened these last 10 years, the death and destruction, $4 trillion in debt. So, no, it's not worthwhile going to war. If you do, you get a declaration of war, and you fight it, and you win it, and get it over with.
Thank you, Congressman. Governor Perry, what's your appraisal of the combat situation on the ground in Afghanistan today, and what would you change?
Let me answer the previous question very quickly, if I may.
Governor, I'd like to move on. Could you give me a sense of your appraisal of the combat situation?
I have a minute, and I can do both in 1 minute, I'll promise you.
Yeah. There you go.
And the issue that has not been raised is that this country can sanction the Iranian central bank right now and shut down that country's economy. And that's what this president needs to do, and the American people need to stand up and force him to make that stand today. Now, let me address this issue of Afghanistan and how we deal with it. The mission must be completed there. The idea that we will have wasted our treasure and the lives of young Americans to not secure Afghanistan is not appropriate. But the idea that we would give a timetable to our enemy is irresponsible from a military standpoint. It's irresponsible from the lives of our young men and women, and it is irresponsible leadership of this president to give a timetable. to pull out of any country that we're in conflict with.
But, Governor, if I can just follow up for 30 seconds. The question was, what's your appraisal of the combat situation on the ground there, and what would you change as Commander-in-Chief?
Well, obviously, we're discussing with our commanders on the field about what's going on in Afghanistan. I think we're making progress there. The issue is training up the Afghan security forces so that we're comfortable that they can protect that citizenry and continue to take the war to the terrorists that are using Afghanistan and Pakistan, I might add. Is a very complex part of the world. But I think that our military is doing the best job that they can, considering the lack of support that they're getting from this administration, telegraphing to the enemy when we're going to pull out.
Senator Santorum, I know you want to jump in on Iran. I'll give you that opportunity here just a second. So let me merge two things if I could, just 1 second. The Taliban said earlier this summer, quote, "The Afghans have an endless stamina for a long war." If you were Commander-in-Chief, would you have endless stamina for victory in Afghanistan? And would you this evening define victory in Afghanistan for the American people? And please weigh in, I know you do want to, on Iran.
Thank you very much, Major. I appreciate that. Victory against the Taliban in Afghanistan is that the Taliban is a neutered force. They are no longer a security threat to the Afghan people or to our country. That would be victory. Doesn't mean wipe them out. You can't wipe them out, but they're no longer a security threat. The bigger issue, and I know there's those of us at the end who don't get a lot of questions, and so this is the most important national security issue that we're going to be dealing with here in this year, and that's the issue of Iran getting a nuclear weapon. I think everyone should have the opportunity to answer that question, particularly me. I've been working on Iran since back in 2004, and I proposed exactly the things that Herman and Mitt Romney suggested, which was to give money to the rebel forces there to help the pro-democracy movement and to put tough sanctions in place. I was opposed by President Bush, and yet we were able to overcome that and pass the Iran Freedom and Support Act. I was able to get that done, and then President Bush didn't provide money for the pro-democracy movement, and President Obama cut that money. We have a situation that's different. I disagree with Newt. More sanctions and providing, more support for the pro-democracy movement isn't going to be enough in time. Read the IAEA report.
Senator, I'm sorry, that's time. I'm sorry. We're going to try to adhere to time and be fair to everyone in the application of that rule.
I understand. Just let me finish my final comment. My final comment is we should be working with Israel right now to do what they did in Syria, what they did in Iraq, which is take out that nuclear capability before the next explosion we hear in Iran is a nuclear one, and then the world changes.
That is time. Thank you. Representative Bachmann, do you think the 30,000 surge troops in Afghanistan have made a difference, and if so, where?